The November wind cut through Liam Quinn's coat like a knife as he rode along Hondo Creek, the water running high and fast from the recent rains that had swept across New Mexico territory in 1878. He wasn't expecting to find anything more interesting than a few scattered cattle when he spotted the dark shape huddled against the creek bank, barely visible in the fading afternoon light. At first he thought it might be a wounded animal, but as his horse drew closer, his heart lurched. It was a woman, curled on her side in the mud, her whole body shaking violently. Liam was off his horse before he fully registered what he was doing. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly before he touched her shoulder. She was burning up, the heat radiating through her soaked dress even in the cold air. Her lips were cracked and moving soundlessly, her eyes closed, dark hair plastered to her face and neck. She looked young, maybe early 20s, and she was alone out here in the middle of nowhere. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He'd been riding fence line for 3 days without seeing another soul. "Madam, can you hear me?" She didn't respond, just kept shivering in a way that told him she was deep in the grip of fever. Her clothes were torn in places, muddy and soaked through. He looked around quickly, searching for a horse, a wagon, anything that might explain how she'd gotten here. Nothing. Just the empty grassland stretching toward the distant mountains, and the creek rushing past, indifferent to human suffering. Liam didn't hesitate any longer. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her before lifting her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe fear made him stronger. Her head lolled against his chest, and he could feel the tremors running through her body. He managed to get her onto his horse, holding her secure against him as he mounted behind her. His ranch was only about 5 miles south, but it felt like 50 as he urged his horse into a careful trot, one arm locked around the woman's waist to keep her from falling. The ride back to his small ranch near Chisholm Ranch, New Mexico, passed in a blur of worry. She never once opened her eyes or spoke, just burned like a coal against his chest. By the time his cabin came into view, tucked into a small valley with a barn and corral beside it, full dark had fallen, and his arms ached from holding her steady. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him with his boot heel. The cabin was cold, the fire having died to embers while he was out. He laid her carefully on his bed, the only bed in the single-room structure, then moved quickly to build up the fire. His hands shook slightly as he added kindling and logs, blowing on the embers until flames caught and spread. Light filled the cabin, and he got his first good look at her. Even sick and filthy, she was beautiful. High cheekbones, a straight nose, dark lashes against pale cheeks. Her dress had once been nice, he thought, maybe calico or something similar, though it was hard to tell under all the mud and damage. There was dried blood on her temple, a nasty scrape that had scabbed over. Liam knew he should probably ride to get the doctor from Chisholm Ranch, but that would mean leaving her alone, and something in him rebelled against that idea. Besides, it was a good 10 miles to town, and by the time he got there and back with Doc Harrison, it might be too late. He'd learned basic nursing from his mother before she'd passed, and from necessity during his years punching cattle across rough country. He heated water on the stove, then carefully began cleaning the wound on her head. She stirred slightly when the warm cloth touched her skin, a small sound escaping her lips. Up close, he could see she couldn't be more than 23 or 24, closer to his own 26 years than he'd initially thought. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, her cheeks flushed with fever. "You're safe now," he told her quietly, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "I've got you." He worked methodically, cleaning the visible wounds, checking for broken bones. Her ankle was swollen, badly sprained at the least. When he touched it gently through her torn stocking, she whimpered but didn't wake. He wrapped it carefully with strips of clean cloth, then covered her with every blanket he owned. The fever concerned him most. He'd seen men die from fever, watched them burn up from the inside until there was nothing left. He made willow bark tea the way his mother had taught him, then lifted the woman's head and tried to get some of the liquid past her lips. Most of it dribbled down her chin, but she swallowed a little, her throat working reflexively. Night deepened around the cabin. Liam pulled his chair close to the bed and sat down, elbows on his knees, watching her breathe. Every few minutes she would shiver violently despite the blankets and the warmth from the fire. He found himself talking to her, his voice low and steady in the quiet room. "My name's Liam Quinn," he said. "This is my place, about 5 miles from Chisholm Ranch. You're in New Mexico territory, in case you don't know where you are. I found you by the creek, and I don't know how you got there or what happened to you, but you're safe here. I won't let anything hurt you." She didn't respond, lost somewhere in the fever's grip. He wet a cloth and laid it on her forehead, changing it frequently as it heated from her skin. The night stretched long and dark. He dozed in the chair, jerking awake every time she moved or made a sound. Near dawn, her shivering grew worse, her whole body convulsing with chills despite the heavy blankets. Liam made a decision. He pulled off his boots and gun belt, then climbed onto the bed beside her, carefully pulling her against him. His mother had done this once when his younger brother had nearly died from fever, using body heat to fight the chills. He wrapped his arms around the woman, holding her close, trying to share his warmth. She turned into him instinctively, her face pressing against his chest, seeking heat. He held her through the worst of the chills, murmuring reassurances, one hand stroking her matted hair. Gradually, the violent shaking eased to tremors, then finally stopped. Her breathing deepened slightly, became less labored. Dawn light filtered through the cabin's single window. Liam carefully extricated himself and added more wood to the fire. He made coffee and tried to eat some jerky, but his stomach was tight with worry. The woman slept on, still burning with fever but at least resting. He changed the cloth on her forehead again and managed to get a bit more willow bark tea into her. The day passed in a strange, suspended way. He should have been riding fence, checking the small herd of cattle he was building up, but he couldn't make himself leave her side. Instead, he heated water and carefully cleaned her, washing away the mud and blood as best he could while preserving her modesty. Her dress was ruined beyond saving. He found one of his clean shirts and managed to get her into it, averting his eyes as much as possible. Her hair was tangled and full of debris. He worked through it patiently with his mother's old comb, finding twigs and leaves and dried mud. It was long, falling past her shoulders in dark waves once it was clean. He braided it loosely to keep it out of her face. By afternoon, he noticed something encouraging. Her fever seemed slightly lower, her cheeks less flushed. He allowed himself a small measure of hope. He made broth from dried beef and again tried to get some past her lips. This time she swallowed more readily, and he took that as a good sign. "That's it," he encouraged softly. "You keep fighting, don't you give up." The second night was easier than the first. She slept more peacefully, though he still sat watch in his chair, unwilling to leave her even to sleep in the barn. Near midnight she stirred and spoke, her voice barely a whisper, too low for him to make out the words. He leaned close. "It's all right," he told her. "Rest now." Whatever dream or memory gripped her seemed to ease. She quieted, one hand creeping out from under the blankets. Without thinking, Liam took it, holding her small hand in his larger, calloused one. Her fingers were delicate but work roughened. Not a pampered lady then, but someone who knew labor. Morning of the third day brought a change. The fever broke just after dawn, her skin cooling to merely warm instead of burning. Liam felt relief wash over him so strongly his hands shook. She slept deeply now, truly resting instead of trapped in fever's delirium. He let himself doze in the chair, exhausted from 2 nearly sleepless nights. He woke to find her eyes open, watching him. They were gray-green, he noticed, like sage after rain. Confusion and fear warred in her expression. "Easy," Liam said gently, not moving from his chair. "You're safe. My name's Liam Quinn. I found you by the creek 3 days ago. You've been sick with fever." She stared at him, her lips parted slightly. Then her gaze darted around the cabin, taking in the rough furniture, the fire, the single room. When she looked back at him, he saw her swallow hard. "Where?" she began, her voice cracking from disuse. She tried again. "Where am I?" "My ranch, about 5 miles from Chisholm Ranch in New Mexico territory," he said. He stood slowly, reaching for the water pitcher on the table. "You want some water?" she nodded, trying to push herself up. Pain crossed her face and she looked down, seeming to realize for the first time that she was wearing his shirt. Color flooded her cheeks. "Your dress was ruined," Liam said quickly, keeping his eyes on the cup he was filling. "Torn and covered in mud and blood. I had to get you into something clean and dry. I was proper about it," he added, finally meeting her eyes. "I swear it." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He brought her the water and she drank deeply, her hands shaking slightly. When she finished, he took the cup and set it aside. "What's your name?" he asked. "Teresa," she said softly. "Teresa Adams. I was traveling with a wagon train headed to California. We were camped about 20 miles north of here when the fever hit me. She stopped, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "They left me, said they couldn't risk the fever spreading to everyone else. They gave me a canteen and some food and left me by the side of the trail." Anger flared hot in Liam's chest. "They left you alone, sick like that?" "The wagon master said it was for the good of all," Teresa whispered. "He said I'd probably die anyway and it was God's will. I tried to walk south, thinking I might find help. I remember following the creek, but everything after that is blurry. I must have collapsed." "You did more than collapse," Liam said grimly. "You were nearly dead when I found you, burning with fever soaked through hurt. If I hadn't been riding that way when I did, you wouldn't have lasted the night." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why did you help me? You don't know me." "You could have caught the fever yourself." Liam shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "Couldn't just leave you there to die, it wouldn't have been right." She wiped at her tears with a shaking hand. "Thank you. I don't have any way to repay you, but thank you, you saved my life." "You don't owe me anything," he said firmly. "You rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger. Are you hungry?" She nodded hesitantly. He made her more broth and helped her sit up to drink it, propping her with his pillows. She was weak, her hands trembling as she held the cup, but she managed to finish the whole thing. Exhaustion quickly claimed her again and she sank back against the pillows. "I'll let you sleep," Liam said. "I need to check my cattle, but I won't be far. You need anything, there's a bell on the table. Ring it and I'll hear." "Where will you sleep?" she asked, her eyes already drooping. "The barn's got a good loft," he said, though in truth he hadn't given it much thought. "Don't you worry about me." He watched her fall asleep, then quietly left the cabin. The cold air outside hit him like a slap after 3 days in the warm cabin. His horse whinnied a greeting from the corral, no doubt wondering why his routine had been so disrupted. Liam fed him and the other 2 horses he kept, then checked the barn. The cattle would have to wait another day. He was too tired to ride fence now. Instead, he cleaned himself up at the pump, washing away 3 days of worry and sweat. He shaved at the barn's small mirror, making himself presentable again. When he returned to the cabin an hour later, carrying wood for the fire, Teresa was still sleeping peacefully. Over the following days, a routine established itself. Teresa grew stronger slowly, her body recovering from the fever's ravages. The swelling in her ankle went down, though it was still too painful for her to put weight on. Liam helped her move from the bed to the chair by the fire, gave her privacy when she needed it, brought her meals and changed the dressing on the scrape on her head. They talked while he worked around the cabin, mending tack or cleaning his guns. She told him about her life back in Missouri, how her parents had died the previous winter and left her alone. She'd sold their small farm and used the money to join a wagon train west, hoping to start fresh in California, where she had a distant cousin. "I don't even know if my cousin is still there," she said one evening, watching the fire. "The letter I got from her was 2 years old. She might have moved on, or worse. I might have given up everything to chase a dream that doesn't exist anymore. What would you have done in California?" Liam asked. He was working oil into his saddle, the leather supple under his hands. "I don't know exactly," Teresa admitted. "I can sew, and I'm a fair cook. I thought maybe I could find work as a seamstress or in a boarding house. I just wanted somewhere I could make my own way, you know. Where I wasn't poor Teresa Adams, the orphan girl everyone pitied." Liam understood that feeling more than she knew. He'd left his own home in Texas after his mother died, unable to stay in a place that reminded him of her at every turn. He drifted west, working ranches, saving money. This small place was his first real attempt at putting down roots, and some days he wondered if he was fooling himself. "You could stay here," he said, then felt his face heat. "I mean until you're well enough to travel. No rush." Teresa looked at him, something soft in her expression. "You've already done so much. I can't impose any longer than necessary." "It's not imposing if I'm offering," he said firmly. "Besides, winter's coming on, not a good time to be traveling alone." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't have money for passage anywhere now. Everything I had was in the wagon that left me behind. My money belt, my mother's jewelry, everything." The loss in her voice made Liam's chest tight. "We'll figure something out," he said. "Don't worry about that now." As November gave way to December, Teresa healed. She started helping around the cabin despite Liam's protests, insisting that she needed to do something to earn her keep. She cooked meals that were far better than anything Liam had managed for himself, mended his clothes with neat, tiny stitches, cleaned and organized the cabin until it felt more like a home than a place to sleep between long days of work. Liam found himself looking forward to returning from his daily rounds, knowing she would be there. They would share dinner and talk about everything and nothing. She was sharp and funny when she forgot to be guarded, with strong opinions about things he'd never thought much about. She believed in women's suffrage and thought the treatment of native tribes was a national shame. She'd read books he'd never heard of and could quote poetry from memory. For her part, Teresa found herself watching for Liam's return each evening. He was different from any man she'd known before. Quiet but not cold, strong but gentle. She'd seen the way he was with his horses, patient and kind. He never raised his voice, never made her feel like a burden even though she knew she was disrupting his life completely. One evening in mid-December, a storm blew in hard from the north. Wind howled around the cabin and snow began to fall, thick and fast. Liam came in from securing the barn, covered in white, stamping snow from his boots. "It's a bad one," he said, shaking snow from his hat. "We might be stuck inside for a few days if this keeps up." Teresa was making stew, the cabin warm and fragrant with cooking. She looked up from the pot, concern crossing her face. "Are the animals all right?" "They're good, Plenty of hay and water. They'll weather it fine in the barn." He hung his coat and hat by the door, then moved to warm his hands by the fire. "How's your ankle?" "Better," she said. It was true. She could walk on it now without much pain, though it still ached when the weather changed. "I've been practicing while you were out." He turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised. "Practicing?" She demonstrated, walking carefully across the cabin floor. She still favored it slightly, but she was moving much better than even a week ago. Pride lit her face as she completed the circuit and looked at him for approval. Liam smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "That's real good, Teresa. Another few weeks and you'll be good as new." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that her healing meant she would leave soon. The thought sat heavy in the room. Teresa turned back to the stew, stirring it with more vigor than necessary. Liam busied himself checking the fire. The storm lasted 3 days. They were trapped in the small cabin together, but it didn't feel confining. They played cards and talked. Liam taught her to play poker, and she beat him soundly once she understood the game, laughing at his surprised expression. She taught him a word game her mother had loved, and they whiled away the long evening hours challenging each other. On the second night, as wind rattled the shutters and snow piled against the walls, they sat by the fire and Teresa found herself telling him things she'd never spoken aloud before. About how lonely she'd been after her parents died, how the people she'd thought were friends had disappeared once there was no more money, how scared she'd been joining the wagon train, alone among strangers, how betrayed she'd felt when they left her to die. Liam listened without interrupting, his eyes on her face in the firelight. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad they left you," he said finally. She looked at him in shock. "Not like that," he amended quickly. "I'm not glad they did that to you. It was cruel and wrong. But I'm glad because if they hadn't, I wouldn't have found you. And I can't imagine now not having found you." Teresa's breath caught. "Liam." "I know it's too soon," he said, his voice rough. "I know you're still healing, still figuring out what you want to do. But I need you to know that having you here these past weeks, it's been the best time I can remember. This place, it was just a house before. You made it a home." She stood, her heart pounding, and crossed to where he sat. She reached out tentatively and touched his face, feeling the scratch of stubble under her palm. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like he was starving for it. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I don't have anywhere to go, it's true, but that's not why I want to stay. I want to stay because when I think about leaving, about never seeing you again, I can't breathe." His eyes opened, dark and intense in the firelight. "You mean that?" "Every word." He stood slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She didn't. Instead, she stepped closer, tilting her face up to his. He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said softly. "If that's all right." "Please," she breathed. His lips met hers carefully, tentatively, like she was something precious that might break. She made a small sound and pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. The kiss deepened, grew more confident. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Liam rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said. "Not as someone I'm helping, as someone I'm courting, proper-like. Stay and let me show you what kind of man I can be for you." "I already know what kind of man you are," Teresa said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're the kind who saves lives. Who sits up for 3 days and nights with a stranger, fighting for her when she can't fight for herself. You're kind and good and honest, and I've been half in love with you since I woke up and saw you watching over me." "Only half?" he asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "Well, fully in love now," she admitted, feeling her cheeks heat. But it seemed too bold to say. He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper. When they parted, he tucked her against his side and they stood together watching the fire, the storm raging outside forgotten. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the world transformed by fresh snow. Liam dug a path to the barn while Teresa made breakfast. They moved around each other in the cabin with new awareness, hands brushing as they passed, glances holding longer than necessary. Everything was the same, yet completely different. As winter deepened, their relationship grew. Liam was a patient, thoughtful suitor. He brought her small gifts from town when he rode to Chisholm Ranch for supplies, ribbons for her hair and peppermint sticks that made her laugh with delight. He held her hand while they sat by the fire in the evenings and stole kisses when the moment felt right, but he never pushed for more. He wanted to do this right, to give her the respect and courtship she deserved. Teresa bloomed under his attention. She'd never felt so cherished, so valued. Liam listened when she talked, asked her opinion on things, treated her like an equal partner. When he brought her to meet the neighbors at a Christmas gathering in Chisholm Ranch, he introduced her with quiet pride, his hand at the small of her back, protective and possessive in the best way. The women of the area were kind to her, though she saw their curious glances. She knew they were wondering about the propriety of her living on Liam's ranch, but when they saw how he looked at her, how carefully he treated her, the speculation turned to gentle approval. More than one woman pulled her aside to tell her that Liam Quinn was a good man, one of the best, and she was lucky to have caught his eye. Teresa already knew she was lucky. She felt it every day in 100 small ways. The way Liam always made sure she had the most comfortable chair. How he banked the fire at night so she wouldn't wake to cold. The way his whole face softened when he looked at her, like she was the best thing he'd ever seen. Winter passed into early spring. By March of 1879, Teresa's ankle had healed completely, and she was fully integrated into the rhythm of ranch life. She tended a kitchen garden that was just beginning to sprout, fed the chickens Liam had brought home one day as a surprise, and helped with the horses. She loved the horses, especially the gentle mare Liam had designated as hers. One warm evening in April, Liam rode in from checking cattle with a strange look on his face. Teresa met him at the barn, immediately concerned. "What's wrong?" she asked. He dismounted and stood for a moment, just looking at her. The setting sun turned everything golden, and she looked so beautiful it made his chest ache. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, her face sun-kissed and healthy, her gray-green eyes bright with concern for him. "Liam, you're scaring me," she said, stepping closer. "What happened?" "Nothing happened," he said. "Everything's fine, better than fine." He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about something all day, couldn't hardly focus on my work for thinking about it." She waited, her hand on his arm. "I know we haven't been courting that long," he said. "Only about 4 months, really, but I feel like I've known you forever. Like you were always meant to be here with me, and I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to wonder or worry. I just want you to be mine, properly and legal for the rest of our lives." Teresa's breath caught as he dropped to one knee in the barn doorway, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I went to town yesterday," he said. "Told you I was getting supplies," which was true, but I also went to the jeweler. It's not fancy, but it's real gold and the stone is genuine. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small green stone. "It's peridot. It reminded me of your eyes." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Liam." "Teresa Adams, will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me? Have children with me, grow old with me? I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. I'll work hard and provide for you. I'll protect you and cherish you and love you until my last breath. Please say you'll be my wife." "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, lifting her off the ground as he kissed her. She laughed and cried at the same time, her arms around his neck, holding him tight. When he finally set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Chisholm Ranch. Teresa wore a simple dress she'd made herself from cream-colored fabric Liam had bought her, and she carried wildflowers he'd picked that morning. He wore his good suit, his dark hair slicked back, looking so handsome her heart skipped when she saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony was brief and simple, attended by the neighbors who had become friends over the winter. When the reverend pronounced them man and wife, Liam kissed her with such tenderness that several women in attendance dabbed at their eyes. They rode back to the ranch in Liam's wagon, newly painted for the occasion. Teresa couldn't stop looking at the ring on her finger, the physical proof that this was real. She was married. She was Teresa Quinn now, wife to the best man she'd ever known. That night, Liam carried her over the threshold of their cabin, making her laugh. He set her down carefully and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "I love you too," she whispered back. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." He kissed her deeply, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, no holding back. This was their wedding night, and they had every right to express the love and desire that had been building between them for months. Liam was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Teresa gave herself to him completely, trusting him with her whole heart. Later, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Teresa traced patterns on Liam's chest and marveled at how her life had changed. Less than 6 months ago, she'd been dying by a creek, abandoned and alone. Now she was married to a wonderful man, safe and loved in a home that was truly hers. "What are you thinking about?" Liam asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. "How grateful I am," she said. "How lucky I am that you found me." "I'm the lucky one," he insisted. "You could have gone anywhere once you healed, done anything, but you chose to stay here with me." "There was never really a choice," Teresa said. "My heart chose you the moment I woke up and saw you watching over me. Everything after that was just catching up to what my heart already knew." He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Quinn. We have a whole life ahead of us." She smiled against his skin. "Mrs. Quinn, I like the sound of that." The spring turned to summer, and they fell into the rhythm of married life. Teresa proved to be a capable ranch partner, helping with everything from branding cattle to breaking horses. Liam had worried at first about her doing such hard work, but she insisted she wasn't fragile and wanted to contribute. They worked side by side during the long days, and at night they fell into bed exhausted but content. Liam had never been happier. Every day he thanked God for the impulse that had made him ride along the creek that November afternoon. Every day he looked at Teresa and wondered how he'd gotten so lucky. By the fall of 1879, Teresa suspected she was carrying their first child. She waited to be certain before telling Liam, spending a week in nervous excitement. When she finally told him one evening after supper, his reaction was everything she'd hoped for. He shouted in joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. Then he set her down carefully, his hands instantly protective on her still flat stomach. "Are you sure?" he asked, his eyes bright. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," she said. "But I'm about 6 weeks late with my courses and I've been sick in the mornings. I think so, yes." "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "You're having my baby." "Our baby," she corrected, covering his hands with hers. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said. He knelt down and pressed a kiss to her stomach. "Hello in there, little one." I'm your daddy, and I already love you more than anything." Teresa felt tears sting her eyes. She'd known Liam would be a wonderful father, but seeing the proof of it, feeling his joy and love, made her fall in love with him all over again. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Teresa stayed healthy and strong, continuing to help around the ranch until Liam finally insisted she take it easier in her final months. Their son was born on a warm day in May of 1880, after a long but uncomplicated labor. Liam held Teresa's hand through the whole thing, murmuring encouragement, letting her squeeze his hand until he thought the bones might break. When the midwife placed the squalling infant in Teresa's arms, both parents wept. He was perfect, with dark hair like his mother and his father's strong features. They named him Lucas, after Liam's grandfather. Liam had never known his heart could hold so much love. Watching Teresa nurse their son, seeing her smile down at the baby with such devotion, he felt complete in a way he hadn't known was possible. His little family was everything to him. Lucas proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong. He grew quickly, and by his first birthday he was toddling around the ranch getting into everything. Teresa was pregnant again by then, due in the spring of 1881. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born in April. She looked just like Teresa, with the same gray-green eyes and delicate features. Liam was completely smitten, this tiny girl who wrapped around his finger from the moment he held her. Life settled into a beautiful pattern. The ranch grew and prospered under Liam's careful management. He bought more land, increased their cattle herd, built a larger house to accommodate their growing family. Teresa transformed the new house into a warm, loving home, filled with laughter and the sound of children playing. By 1885, they had 4 children. After Sarah came another son, Michael, born in 1883, and then another daughter, Emma, born in 1885. The house was always full of noise and energy, but Liam and Teresa wouldn't have had it any other way. Through everything, their love for each other only deepened. They still found time to steal quiet moments together, sitting on the porch after the children were in bed, talking about their day. Liam still looked at Teresa like she hung the moon, and she still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her in that special way that was just for her. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Liam took Teresa out to the spot by Hondo Creek where he'd found her. It had become a tradition for them to visit every year on their anniversary, a pilgrimage to the place where their story began. They stood hand in hand, looking at the creek flowing past, just as it had that long ago November day. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much my life has changed," Teresa said softly. "If someone had told me that day, when I was so sick and scared and alone, that 10 years later I'd be standing here with you, happy and loved with 4 beautiful children, I wouldn't have believed them. I knew the moment I saw you that you were going to change my life," Liam said. "I didn't know how or in what way, but I knew nothing would ever be the same." "Were you scared?" she asked, looking up at him. "Terrified," he admitted. "When I saw how sick you were, I thought for sure you'd die. I sat by that bed for 3 days convinced I was going to lose you before I even knew you. It would have broken something in me, I think." Teresa squeezed his hand. "But you didn't lose me. You saved me in more ways than one. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love. Real, true, lasting love. You gave me the same," he said. He pulled her into his arms and they stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I love you, Teresa Quinn. I have loved you from the beginning and I will love you until the end. And I love you, Liam Quinn, forever and always." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, 2 souls perfectly matched, bound together by fate and choice and a love that had weathered every storm. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The children grew, healthy and strong and happy. Lucas showed a talent for working with horses and often helped his father around the ranch. Sarah was quiet and bookish, always with her nose in a book. Michael was the adventurous one, constantly getting into scrapes, while Emma was the peacemaker, smoothing over arguments with her sweet nature. In 1892, Teresa gave birth to their fifth and final child, a son they named Daniel. He was an easy baby, content and smiley, and completed their family perfectly. The ranch continued to thrive. Liam's hard work and fair dealing had earned him a solid reputation in the area. He hired hands to help with the work as the ranch grew, but he never forgot where he came from or became too proud to work alongside his men. Teresa had become a respected member of the community. She was known for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need. More than once, she took in someone who was sick or struggling, remembering what it had been like to be alone and desperate. Liam never objected, proud of his wife's generous heart. As the children got older, Teresa and Liam made sure to teach them the values they held dear: honesty, hard work, compassion, and courage. The children grew up knowing the story of how their parents met, the miracle of their father finding their mother and saving her life. It became a family legend, told and retold until the children could recite it by heart. In 1895, Lucas, now 15, asked his father about that day by the creek. "What made you check that part of the fence line that day?" he asked. "You said you weren't planning to ride that way." Liam thought about it, remembering. "I don't rightly know," he said slowly. "I'd been planning to check the north pasture, but something made me change my mind at the last minute. A feeling, I guess, though I didn't understand it at the time, like something was pulling me in that direction." "Fate," Teresa said softly from where she was mending nearby. "It was fate. We were meant to find each other." "You believe in that, Ma?" Lucas asked. "That some things are just meant to be." "I do," Teresa said firmly. "I believe God has a plan for each of us, and sometimes the worst things that happen lead to the best things. I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone, being left to die like that. But it brought me to your father, to this life, to all of you. So yes, I believe it was meant to be." Liam reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. They shared a look of perfect understanding, a whole conversation passing between them without words. The turn of the century found the Quinn family well established and respected. The children were growing into fine young adults. Lucas was talking about starting his own ranch someday. Sarah had dreams of becoming a teacher. Michael wanted to join the cavalry. Emma and Daniel were still young enough to change their minds daily about what they wanted to be when they grew up. Liam and Teresa, now in their 40s, had weathered into a comfortable, deep love. The passion of their early days had matured into something richer, a partnership built on respect and trust and genuine affection. They could still make each other laugh, still found joy in each other's company after more than 20 years of marriage. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they'd built together, and talk about the future. About the grandchildren they hoped to have someday, about growing old together, about the life they'd created from the ashes of Teresa's near death and Liam's loneliness. In 1903, Lucas married a sweet girl named Mary from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was held at the Quinn Ranch, a big celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from all over the territory. Watching her eldest son pledge his love to his bride, Teresa found herself thinking about her own wedding day so many years ago. She'd been so young, so naive about what lay ahead. But she hadn't been wrong about Liam. He'd kept every promise he made that day in the barn when he proposed. Liam seemed to read her thoughts. He slipped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "Our wedding day," she admitted. "How young we were, how much life we've lived since then." "Any regrets?" he asked. She looked up at him, at the gray threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, the solid strength of him that had never wavered. "Not a single one," she said. "You," he kissed her forehead tenderly. "Only that I wish I'd found you sooner. That we could have had even more years together." "We still have time," she reminded him. "We're not old yet." "No," he agreed, smiling. "We're not. We've got a lot of living left to do, Mrs. Quinn." Their first grandchild, a boy named Liam after his grandfather, was born in 1904. Liam and Teresa were besotted with the baby, marveling at the tiny miracle of the next generation. More grandchildren followed in the coming years as their children married and started families of their own. Sarah became a teacher as she dreamed, though she eventually married a banker and moved to Albuquerque. Michael did join the cavalry and served for several years before coming home to ranch near his parents. Emma married young to a doctor and had 5 children in quick succession. Daniel, the baby, showed a talent for music and spent several years traveling before settling down. Through it all, Liam and Teresa remained the steady center of their growing family. Their home was always open, always welcoming. Sunday dinners at the Quinn Ranch became a tradition, with children and grandchildren gathering to share a meal and catch up on the week's news. In the spring of 1912, Liam and Teresa celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, gathering the whole family for a celebration. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and stories. Lucas stood up to tell the story of how his parents met, embellishing it for the younger grandchildren's benefit until Liam had to interrupt to set the record straight. "The truth is good enough," Liam said, his arm around Teresa's shoulders. "I went out to check fence line and found your grandmother dying by the creek. I brought her home and took care of her, and somewhere along the way I fell in love. It wasn't fancy or complicated. It was just right. Best decision I ever made was staying," Teresa added. "I could have moved on once I healed, but I looked at this man and I knew. I knew he was my home, my future, everything I'd been looking for without knowing it." The grandchildren listened, rapt. They'd heard the story before, but it never got old. It was romantic and dramatic and real, and it had given them their family. As the party wound down and the family dispersed to their various homes, Liam and Teresa stood on their porch, waving goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road, they turned to each other. "Happy anniversary," Liam said softly. "Happy anniversary," Teresa replied. 33 years. Can you believe it?" "Feels like yesterday and forever at the same time," he said. He took her hand and led her down the porch steps. "Come with me, I want to show you something." She followed him, curious, as he led her toward the barn. But instead of going inside, he walked around to the back, where a small garden grew. In the center of the garden was a bench she didn't recognize, beautifully carved from wood. "I made this," Liam said, a touch of shyness in his voice that reminded her of the young man he'd been. "I've been working on it for months, sneaking time when you weren't around. I wanted to give you something special for our anniversary." Teresa ran her hand over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship. He'd carved their names into the back, along with their wedding date. On the seat, he'd carved a simple scene, a man on horseback finding a woman by a creek. "Liam," she breathed. "It's beautiful." "I thought we could put it by the creek," he said, "at the spot where I found you, so we can sit there whenever we want and remember." Tears filled her eyes. "I love it. I love you." They installed the bench the next day, securing it in a shady spot overlooking Hondo Creek. It became their place, a spot where they would go to talk or simply sit in companionable silence, watching the water flow past and remembering the day that had changed everything. The years continued their steady march. Liam and Teresa grew older, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, tempered by time and trials into something unbreakable. In 1918, tragedy struck when Michael was killed in the war in Europe. The loss devastated the whole family. Liam and Teresa held each other and wept for the son they'd never see again, for the future he'd never have. But they also drew strength from each other and from the family that surrounded them, pulling together in grief. They honored Michael's memory by living fully, by cherishing every moment with their remaining children and their growing number of grandchildren. Life was precious and uncertain. They knew better than most, and they refused to waste a single day. By the mid-1920s, Liam and Teresa had slowed down considerably. The ranch was run mostly by Lucas and his sons now, though Liam still liked to put her around, offering advice and keeping his hand in. Teresa spent her days with her grandchildren, teaching them to bake and sew, telling them stories of the old days. On a warm evening in May of 1925, they sat together on their bench by the creek. It had been 46 years since Liam had found Teresa in this very spot, 46 years of life and love and family. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Teresa asked. She was in her 70s now, her dark hair completely white, her face lined with the evidence of a life well lived. "When I was so sick with fever," Liam thought back, searching his memory. "I told you that you were safe, that I had you. You kept that promise," she said, taking his hand. "For 46 years, you've kept me safe. You've had me. Through everything, every joy and sorrow, you've been right there beside me." "Where else would I be?" he asked simply. "You're my heart, Teresa. You always have been." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The creek flowed past, constant and eternal, witness to the love story that had begun on its banks so many years ago. In the fall of 1928, Liam fell ill. It started as a cough that wouldn't go away, then turned into pneumonia. Teresa nursed him with the same devotion he'd shown her all those years ago, but they both knew his body was worn out. He'd lived a good, long life, but he was 74 years old and tired. On a cold November morning, with Teresa holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed, Liam Quinn passed peacefully from this world to the next. His last words were for his wife. "I'll be waiting for you," he whispered. "On the other side, I'll be there." "I know you will," Teresa whispered back, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Liam. I will always love you." "Always," he breathed, and then he was gone. Teresa mourned deeply, but she didn't break. Liam had given her a strong foundation, and she stood on it even in her grief. She lived 3 more years, spending them surrounded by her children and grandchildren, sharing memories of Liam, making sure the younger generations knew the story of their love. In the spring of 1931, on a day when the wildflowers were blooming along Hondo Creek, Teresa Quinn died peacefully in her sleep. She was 76 years old. Her children found her in bed with a smile on her face, and they liked to think she'd seen Liam waiting for her, just as he'd promised. They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together, with a view of the creek where their story had begun. The headstone bore both their names and a simple inscription: "True love found by a creek, lasting beyond death." Their children and grandchildren continued the traditions they'd established. The Sunday dinners, the anniversary visits to the bench by the creek, the retelling of the story of how Liam had found Teresa and saved her life. only to have her save his in return by giving him a reason to live, to love, to build something lasting. The Quinn ranch remained in the family for generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story, but never forgetting the foundation that Liam and Teresa had laid. The bench by the creek became a place of pilgrimage for the family, a reminder of where it all began. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, people swore they could see two figures sitting on that bench, hand in hand, watching the water flow by. Whether it was memory or spirit or simply the power of true love echoing through time, no one could say. But the Quinn family liked to believe that Liam and Teresa were still there, still together, still loving each other as fiercely as they had in life. Their love story became legend in Chisholm Ranch and the surrounding area, passed down through generations. It was a story of fate and courage, of second chances and enduring devotion. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that when you find that one person who makes your heart whole, you hold on tight and never let go. Lucas Quinn, now an old man himself, would sit on that bench with his great-grandchildren and tell them the story. He would describe how his father had found his mother sick and dying, how he'd carried her home and refused to leave her side, how their love had grown from those dark days into something bright and beautiful that had lasted a lifetime. "That's the kind of love you should look for," he would tell them. "The kind that weathers storms and grows stronger with time. The kind that builds families and creates legacies. That's what your great-grandparents had, and it's what they wanted for all of us." The children would listen, wide-eyed, and then they would run off to play, carrying the story with them. And the creek would flow on, constant and unchanging, keeping its secrets and its memories, a silent witness to one of the greatest love stories the Wild West had ever known. In the end, that was Liam and Teresa's true legacy. Not the land or the money or even the children and grandchildren, though those were all precious. Their real legacy was the proof that true love exists, that it's worth fighting for, worth holding on to, worth building a life around. They showed everyone who knew them that love doesn't have to be complicated or dramatic to be profound, that sometimes the simplest story is the most powerful one. A cowboy found a woman dying by a creek. He carried her home and didn't leave her side. And from that moment of compassion and courage grew a love that would span decades, weather any storm and outlast even death itself. That was the story of Liam and Teresa Quinn, and it was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth aspiring to. As the sun set on another day in New Mexico, casting long shadows across the land that the Quinns had loved so well, the creek continued its eternal journey. And somewhere, in the space between memory and eternity, two souls sat together on a bench, hand in hand, watching the water flow by, their love as constant as the creek itself, as enduring as the land, as timeless as the stars that began to appear in the darkening sky above.